Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So in the previous video, I mentioned wanting to make a stove or possibly make a stove, and I finalized my decision to go ahead. And I'm actually going to use this old chest or dresser as my template or guide as far as size. Now, I do have some other components that I bought from that estate sale I went to last summer and this summer again. And it had some really interesting pieces on it that I thought would be really nice components to be like the doors, drawers, or openings to the stove or oven. Now, in addition to using the little red dresser, I will be using the rooming house stove. Now, it's a different style, but I think it would be good as far as helping me with height for the dowels and for the width and the depth. Now, I have to consider that this particular stove I made a brick platform or base for it to lift it up because my daddy told me that back in the day, big old cast iron stoves had to be installed on top of a brick base because they could get so hot they could actually burn through a wooden floor. So I will need to create that at some point as well. Now the wood I'm using is 1/16 of an inch thick basswood. So dolls, this is going to be somewhat categorized as unorthodox or a rogue build because I don't have a pattern. This is not a kit. It is from scratch. So dolls, I'm creating as I go, straight from my imagination. This is not what Daddy taught me, but it's what I do. Now, it would definitely be a best practice if you worked from some sketches, made some measurements, created a pattern, and pre-cut your wood ahead of time so that you have a plan and you're not wasteful with your materials. But yeah, that's not how I do. You dolls know I just like to play. So I started this process by cutting out the front and back panels to the stove, making sure that the dimensions were similar to the width of my current stove that's in the rooming house. And after I determined that I had both of the fronts cut to an acceptable size, I went on to create the side panels. Now I definitely had to be conscious not to make the side panels too deep because if I take too much room up in the depth of the stove, it won't leave the dolls very much walkway. So you definitely have to stay conscious of your dimensions, your scale, and your size because you don't want to take up unnecessary space in an area that's already small. Now, dolls, I've been saving these lovely pieces for quite some time. I've always admired them. They were given to me as a gift, and I thought they would make really, really great door front. Now, the way they're shaped, I really can't cut them or put them on the other parts of the doors, but I think that it'll really be nice for the main door of the stove as a decorative element. Now, these other pieces, I believe, were intended to be some type of architectural element, but I'm going to use them as doors for my stove. I think the style and design really mimic the look of those old stove doors, and it's really nice that they're already the perfect size. So I cut enough for my initial set and a backup or plan B set in case I mess up. So now I'm playing around with all the pieces that I want to be the doors, trying to determine how to line them up or position them on the door in an attractive way that would look recognizable as a stove. Now to me, looking at this looks really great. And I was so excited the way it looked. I felt like I wanted to add an additional door, which at this point, I don't know if it was a good idea. Looking back, it would have been simpler to just leave it exactly like this. But for some reason, I was just intent on adding another door. So let's get this stove assembled. So I'm going on to put together the body of my stove, and I have the two side panels and the two front panels. So I always think of most dollhouse furniture or cabinets as creating a box and then making the box fancy. So in this frame, I'm adding the two side panels to the back of the stove. And this time, instead of my Lego pieces, I used a part of those cabinets that I was considering for the kitchen as my support while it was drying. Now for this full project, I was using my weld bond glue. And although the glue catches really quickly, I did need to support it until it's set up. Now I just always want to encourage you to be conscious of your fingers and your hands when you're using the craft blade. Always, always, always safety first. So in this process, I had to do quite a few modifications, adjustments, and lots of trimming. But that's what happens when you're not working with a pattern or a kit and you don't measure. But at this point, things were really starting to come together. I did use my little Legos to help me keep things square and level because I don't want the dolls upset at me because their cakes, pies, or roasts have fallen forward due to crooked shelving. I just want to take a moment and put the front on, and that's kind of giving you an idea what it's going to look like. But let me stay focused and keep working. So here I am adding a sparing amount of glue to one of the side panels to the inside of the stove. And here I'm holding things together while the glue catches. To close out the bottom that I'm going to use as what I call an ash drawer. And I put my little Lego down there to support it. Now, when I say Lego, I use that term loosely. These are dollar store building blocks. They are not actual Legos. So while I allow that part to dry, I went on to start to create my baking rack. And so I started with some square dowels to make the frame for the rack, and then the round ones to fill the center. So if you're new to the channel, I really don't like measuring, so I lined all the pieces up where they needed to be cut, and then I marked them with my marker, then snipped them with my miter shears and fit them inside the frame. And there's my baking rack. Now, if you don't have round and square dowels, you can definitely use toothpicks or even matchsticks. Now that the main structure of the stove is coming together, I'm lining things up to close up the bottom of the stove. Now again, dolls, I'm allowing you to see what I did. It is absolutely not the best practice, but I cut it right on top of the piece, and after I marked it with my craft knife, I went ahead and finished cutting the piece out. I've been told that it's the best practice to measure twice and cut once. And I'm really thinking at some point I might actually try that. And dolls, although I didn't do any precise measuring, I did use my Dollhouse Builder's ruler to guide me as I cut. So I definitely think the ruler helped. And although I truly love my ruler, I thought it was going to help me measure more, but I realized it was in metric. So then there's that. Now that the rack is dry, I just want to try it inside the space, and it definitely fits, but I think the supports are not stable enough to support it fully. So I'm going to make them a little bit bigger so that the rack will be stable inside the space. Now I thought about adding like a track to insert the little rack into, but maybe I'll try that on the next stove. I think for my first stove build, this will work. So, dolls, I had this remnant piece of wood that was in a bag of scraps that I purchased, and it just seemed like the perfect piece to add inside the stove to be the part where the ashes fall through because it fit best on the side that I intend to put the fire. And I really felt like it was meant to be because that piece was almost the exact size. I truly feel like things are starting to look really stovey. And although I've got quite a ways to go, I really feel good about how things are looking. So let me glue the bottom on so I don't get distracted. So now it's time for me to tackle a part that I consider the most challenging, which would be creating the openings for the doors. So I started out by using my pin drill to create what I call starter holes. Now I measured out the areas that I want to be open, and so I drill out the corners to just pierce the wood so that when I use my craft knife to cut it out, I have a very defined place to start. Now you can see here in this frame where all the starter holes are, and they let me know where the door openings should be. So I'm reinforcing this little piece because it's actually really soft, it's flexible, it's like a sticker. So I'm gluing it to a piece of wood to make it firmer, and so it'll look like a decorative metal door rather than a sticker. And I put a weight on it so it'll dry flat. So I used my craft knife and my ruler to cut from starter hole to starter hole, and I pierced the first opening. I think it turned out pretty good. So I'm excited. I'm definitely going to need to sand it, but I'm just checking my little door to see if it's the right size to make sure I didn't cut the hole too large. I've only got 4 more openings to cut. Now I want you to be advised that this is truly edited video. This build took me a whole week to make. So you have to take your time, and although I wasn't working from a pattern or any predetermined plans, I did have to think every step through because every decision affects the next decision. I really truly love the process because you have to manage and adapt each different thing, and that's exciting to me. So there's quite a bit that goes into building from scratch with no plan. But in the end, I really, really like the experience because not only does it help you to learn a lot of new things or employ a lot of different skills, and you're faced with the reality of skills that you don't have. So that when you see an amazing miniature made by someone else, you don't have any problem handing over your coins. Now, I did quite a bit of checking of the doors to make sure that the doors would cover the opening that I cut out, and I needed to stay conscious to leave room for the hinges. And after I filed everything, I did do a little gentle sanding in the openings. So at this point, I turned my attention to the legs. Now, I had some kind of cabriole style legs that I bought, and although they were really nice pieces, they were going to make the stove too high or too tall. So I trimmed off the little block that was at the top of the cabriole leg, and then I decided to add my own little bases in the form of some little flat squares. So I added a tiny square piece to the top of the leg to be sort of like the stabilizer where the stove would actually sit on top of the leg. So again, it would create a more level base. But then I realized that the leg was still too long. And I ended up having to cut it again, which made me really concerned because I thought it was going to make it look funny or not very realistic, but it turned out okay too. So now, dolls, I'm getting to the fun part. And before I started to do my painting, I actually coated everything with a thin coat of gesso to add a nice base layer because it's almost like a primer. Now, the legs in this pan, I actually did not add gesso to them. I just went in with my tester's silver or aluminum paint and painted everything with 2 coats so that it would look metallic rather than like wood. And I also added a couple coats of that silver paint to the oven rack as well. Now here is the second most challenging part of this entire build, creating the stovetop. And when I say creating the stovetop, I mean cutting out all the circles. Now I did my stovetop in 2 layers. One piece of wood is slightly smaller than the other piece, and I put the smallest piece on top. And here I am with my protractor that I probably haven't used since 9th grade in my geometry class. And I always thought it was a really cool tool. I guess that's why I hung on to it. But for the first time, I'm using it in my miniatures. Now, after I positioned it to make my circles, I took another pin drill and drilled through to the second piece of wood so I would know where my centers were. And by knowing where the centers are on the other piece of wood, then I knew exactly how to draw my circles on the other level, if that makes sense. And if my explanation wasn't clear, maybe you'll be able to see when I show you. See, this is the second layer, the dots of where the drill touched down, and now I can take those centers and use the protractor to create my second set of circles. And the second set of holes are going to be quite a bit smaller because they're to be more or less the eyes of the stove. So now that I know I have my centers and I know everything will line up, and here I am drawing out my smaller hole with the protractor so I'll know exactly where to cut. Now watch in this next frame, I'm going to draw out my smaller circle under the second layer. And here I am lining it up one last time before I start to cut. Now you're really going to need to take your time with this part, and you want to gently go around it, cutting out little small triangles, almost like you're cutting a pie or a pizza, and slowly go around the perimeter of the circle and then come back and begin to score the center again. Now this is definitely going to take you some time. Be patient with yourself and be careful with your hands. And again, you don't want to do it too fast because you can split the wood. I want you to keep in mind that this is edited video and it took me a lot longer to do this than what you're seeing here. So give yourself some grace and take your time. I believe I actually cut out 2 circles and then left the other one to the next day because it really is quite tedious. Now that I finished cutting out all my circles, I was quite relieved. So I went on to glue those 2 pieces together, and I did put a weight on them so that they would dry flat. And here is my first set of doors. Now, although I constantly tell you dolls to slow down and don't rush to the finish, I actually am at this point because I'm getting really excited about it, what it's going to look like. I was so excited I didn't even add the gesso to the top of the stove. I just went on and painted it black. I'm really impressed with how deep and rich that pure black color covered everything, that it really is starting to look like old metal to me. But that just might be my imagination. To me, this is the point in the build when I can hear my daddy say, uh-oh, uh-oh. So now that the core body of my stove is all assembled, I'm going to go ahead and put my fire together. Now I'm not going to close the top of it. I'm actually going to put it on a hinge because I want to make it accessible because of the fire I'm using. So I've got this lovely light that I was given as a gift. I'm going to use it to make the perfect fire inside my stove. Now in this frame I'm adding glue so I can put on what's going to be a faux hinge. Now while I allow that to dry, I'm going to go ahead and paint the body of my stove green. I always wanted my stove to be green. So many times on the internet you either see white or you see black, and I've even seen red, but I've never seen green. So I'm going to make my stove green, and I do have the black undercoat, and I'm adding this deep green, antique green color to the top because I think that black undertone is going to make it look nice and deep. I was going to make it look a little bit streaky, but yeah, I'm going to go ahead and make it solid because I was considering actually adding dimensional magic to it to make it look like enamel, but I decided against that. Now here I am adding my legs to the corners. I think they look really, really cute. I was concerned about them, but I think they're going to work out well. Now these are some spare boxes I made. I think they're going to work well as drawers. And this is a lovely piece that was given to me by my friend Becky. And it's actually an old drawer handle, but I think it's going to be perfect to be the head of my stove. So I'm painting it that same silver color I did the other metal elements. So for my original set of hinges, I had in my mind that I would make them similar to pin hinges and run them through some tiny beads. So I painted the beads silver and glued them to the front or face of my stove, and it really didn't work out well. The pins were lining up, but the way the door closed, it really didn't work out well. And I worked on it for quite a while trying to figure out how to make it work until I was so frustrated that I was going to glue all the doors to the front and make them non-opening. Until I realized that I was just tired and needed some sleep, so I went to bed. So the next time I came to my craft table, I was feeling really good, and I actually made brand new doors. And this time I painted the body of the door white, and the little top part I painted it green, and then added dimensional magic to make it look as though it was enamel. And that was an idea that came to me after I got some sleep. So I did my green enamel to all of the fronts of the doors. So while that was drying, I wrapped some red tissue paper around that little light, and to me I gave it a really nice little glow to make it look like it was actually hot embers inside the stove. And I actually went ahead and glued the front of the stove on and then taped it with masking tape so that it would dry securely. I really think my fire looks cute. It's very simple, but it's giving me the feeling I'm looking for. And I turned the light off just to see how it looked in the dark. I like that a lot. And I really like that big door made with that sticker. It really gives a nice look. And I can't wait to add the back of the stove because I really think that brings it to life. Now, I'm really grateful that I hadn't gone through with just gluing the fronts to the door or to the front panel of the stove. I remembered the concept of the fabric hinge, and I went ahead and employed that for this project because it was a lot less stressful, and I think it was going to give the type of look that I'm looking for because I really didn't want hinges showing from the outside. So I glued the little fabric inside the stove, and then when it was dry, I fixed it to the inside panel of the door front. I'm really glad now that I stopped and got some sleep. Now, my plan for the head of the stove is to glue this piece of wood to the back. I cut it out to the shape of the drawer handle. I'm adding glue right where I want the handle to be attached. I actually did paint it black so that it would match the rest of the part of the stove, like the stove top. And now I'm adding the drawer handle. And who knew the drawer handle would be the perfect head for the back of my stove. Now, I'm not going to glue this in place. I'm going to allow this part to dry. So instead of glue, I'm going to add several magnets so I can make it detachable. And I'm using magnets instead of glue because my stove top is removable so I can manage my fire. Now again, these are some of those little leftover boxes or cigar boxes that I made in another video, and I will leave a link in the description, but I painted them black on the inside to be ash drawers. Dolls, I'm sorry I'm out of focus, but if you look closely, you can see here that I'm painting my fabric hinges so that they'll be undetectable when the door is open. So here's the head of my stove. It's all dry and ready for me to put the magnets on. But I made one of those side extender shelves that you see on so many cast iron stoves. So I'm just kind of holding all the components together to get a full feel of what everything is going to look like. But there was one thing I had almost forgotten to make, and it was the little handles for the doors. So I stuck a toothpick in a little black seed bead and dipped it in Dimensional Magic. I think they're perfect for door handles. Now I'm gluing on the little side shelf, and I just made it with a few scrap pieces of wood and those little brackets that I got at the estate sale this summer. So now that the main body of the stove is all assembled and the doors are on and the fire is even on the inside of the oven, it's time to go ahead and add a few minor details. So right here on the corner where the leg is, I really wanted to cover that piece up, and I really didn't have anything metal. So I just painted a piece of watercolor paper, and I actually painted it that same silver color and cut it into a little small piece to make it look like a bracket to cover up that rough edge on the outside of the leg. And I did the exact same thing all the way around the stove on each leg. So I don't know if you dolls noticed, but the largest door on the stove has blue on it. And although the blue is really pretty, but somehow I felt like it was competing with the green. So I used my copper colored tester's paint to cover up the blue, and then I added it around the edges to pull the trim all together. And although my stove is not perfect and I'm not going to win any awards, I'm really amused at how it turned out. Because remember, I make fun miniatures, not fine miniatures. Sometimes for me, it's almost a defiance of the rules that I don't measure, I don't have a pattern, I don't have sketches, I didn't plan it out, but I still end up with something I really like. Now, dolls, if you enjoyed this video today, definitely let me know in the comments. And if you have a comment that needs my immediate attention, go ahead and send me an email. And I just want to say thank you to everyone because I'm coming up on my 3rd anniversary, and I'm just amazed at the growth of the channel, and I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. And if you've enjoyed this video today, definitely let me know in the comments. Also, like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.